Cool. I think we'll wait. There's a couple of those coming in, but we'll make a start. Um, Evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. And welcome to Co-op Live event this evening. My name's Caitlin Prowell, and I'm head of politics at the Co-op Party, and really excited for tonight's session, which is called Building Strong Communities, which is going to look at community power and community cohesion as a sort of broad theme. Just before we start and I introduce our speakers, just want to talk you guys through a little bit about how the call will work. We tried to make it as sort of interactive and accessible as possible. So for anyone hard of hearing, I'm told that you can enable a captioning process with a CC icon in the tools panel at the bottom of Zoom. If you have any problems with that, just stick a message in the chat and one of my colleagues can help you out. The Zoom call tonight's been recorded so that it can be shared with some of our colleagues who can't access it live and get stuck on the YouTube channel afterwards. So if you don't want to be part of the recording, if you just stick your camera off for us and go to audio only, just to make sure that everyone's comfortable with that. To make sure that we can hear our speakers properly and that we aren't interrupted, everyone bar the participants has been muted, so only those speaking will have sound enabled. But after we've heard a sort of introduction from each of our speakers, we'll have a kind of short Q&A session. So we'll take questions in two ways. Those of you that have done Co-op Live before will know we'll either take questions from raising your hand virtually on Zoom, which is one of the buttons at the top, I think, for most people. And I'll take them probably in groups of 3, depending how many we get, and ask people to unmute. Or if you prefer, you can post your question in the chat, which is being moderated by our colleagues, and I will sort of go to questions there. The final bit of housekeeping is that both myself and Gareth, one of our speakers, are in Parliament, and we're expecting votes this evening. So if you hear a sort of quite a violently loud alarm bell type noise, then that's the voting bell, and Gareth will disappear to go and do that, and I will stick myself on mute to save everyone's ears, but hopefully that won't be too disruptive. So I think that's all the housekeeping stuff. We'll go to our speakers in a sec, just to introduce the sort of theme here. Those of you that are long-standing Co-op Party activists will know that community ownership is a hugely long-standing co-op value and co-op campaign, and I think fundamentally is about bringing people together, and so people who own community assets are connected to both to each other and to the place around them. They will share responsibility for some of the most crucial aspects of community life, some of the most crucial decisions. They're working together to create physical spaces for communities to spend time together, and they're making decisions, right, as a collective, uniting around sort of common values. And so we wanted to hold this session tonight, partly in the wake of awful riots in the summer across the country by the far right, that has sort of moved our campaigning into community power as a tool for community cohesion, and trying to ask the question of how do we build strong, cohesive, connected communities, I suppose, and what role does community power and community ownership play in that. Part of this involves campaigning for a strengthened community right to buy, which is a campaign that lots of you will be aware of and something the government's committed to. But we also want to think about how we take that further and make it easier for community power to be something that grows and thrives. So without further ado, and I'll stop banging on myself, I'll introduce our speakers and then we'll go to them one by one for kind of 5 minutes or so of chat, and then we'll do a Q&A. So we're going to start with Gareth Snell, who's one of our Labour and Co-op MPs for Stoke-on-Trent Central. And as I said, if you see Gareth disappear from the screen, it's because he's had to go and vote, not that he's not having a good time. So we'll come to you first, Gareth, if that's all right.
Thank you, Caitlin, and thank you to everyone on the call this evening. And yeah, if I do shoot off, trust me, I'd much rather be here talking to you than the very hot event is going to be 9 or 10 votes this evening on the budget. As Caitlin said, I'm Gareth Still. I'm very proud to be one of the 40+ Labour and Co-operative MPs that now sit in Parliament. We're very much part of the government in terms of what we are trying to achieve and what we're trying to do. And I'm actually really proud of the fact that a community like Stoke-on-Trent has a cooperative voice as well as the Labour voice, because as Caitlin rightly said, when those terrible events took place in that first weekend of August, my city, my Sint, was at the epicentre of some of the worst violence in Staffordshire, worst violence in the West Midlands, and certainly the worst violence that we've seen in the city for a very long time. Bit of background, bit of context. This isn't the first time the far right have rocked up to Stoke-on-Trent to sow the seeds of division and hate. It's been their playground, their go-to place for many, many years. The BNP at one point were the official opposition on our council. Nick Griffin used to turn up regularly for council elections and general elections and campaign with the BNP. And it was my by-election in 2017 when Paul Nuttall thought that UKIP would make their official breakthrough. You know, we've been called everything. We were the Brexit capital. We are now a reform target. But every time the far right have come to Stoke-on-Trent, they have never been long-term successful. They've always ended up being rebuffed and beaten. Sometimes their success was genuinely in part to the failure of politics, and that's part of what I want to touch on this evening, because I think that this is a long overdue conversation for the Co-operative Party and the cooperative movement. I think it is. We know our friends in the trade union movement very much on the front line when it comes to tackling fascism and racism in communities. The Co-op Party, I think, has always been there, but we've always been part of the chorus. But I think it's absolutely right that we now start to sing the solo to demonstrate that actually some of the solutions, some of the insulation that we can build in communities against the politics of the far right and hatred, are steeped in cooperative values. They are steeped in the community power, the community ownership, that sense of belonging and coming together and contributing together. It is, I think, where we're going to have to take our city, certainly in Stoke-on-Trent, in order to make sure that those siren voices of far-right politics don't succeed in the way they have in the past. So, just a little bit of history. When Stoke-on-Trent's always been a city that things have been done to. We were a huge beneficiary of the last Labour government in terms of the investment that we had. But it was decided in Whitehall what we were going to get. It was done to the city in a way that the city had to subscribe to in a take it or leave it kind of way. And it meant the communities lost connection with the places that they called home. So we had, some of you may remember, the Housing Market Renewal Pathway Programme, a huge rebuilding exercise. But it was designed and planned by civil servants in Whitehall that completely missed what the communities were that they were rebuilding. We had Building Schools for the Future programme, again, a wonderful set of new build schools that we had, but again, designed and created by civil servants in Whitehall that told communities, you're having a school there, it's going to serve this community, and that's what you're getting, and aren't you very grateful? And we were. We took it and we accepted it. And the same can be said for levelling up that happened under the last government. Stoke was the recipient of generous settlements, but it was to build a car park because that's what the government and the council determined was what the city should have. It was to complete a railway line that went from somewhere that doesn't have a railway station to somewhere else that doesn't have a railway station. It was things that looked good on paper, but didn't really give any power to the community. I think one of the things that we saw in the Brexit referendum, where Stoke voted overwhelmingly to leave the EU, and it wasn't a moral or political outrage at the institutions of the European Union. It wasn't, an admonishment of the D'Hondt system for European parliaments. It was a feeling that actually every other system in the country had stopped listening to them, and this was the one opportunity where their vote would actually matter in a way that people would have to sit up and listen to. And that's where I fear we could end up again if we go through another programme of things being done to Stoke-on-Trent, things being done to communities that are already grieving for what they think they've lost, are already aggrieved about what they think they're going to lose, and are often sold a very simple and simplistic answer by the far right as to who is to blame, why they're to blame, and why it is the othering of communities that are there. So for me, I think the cooperative movement has a really large role to play in this, moving away from that paternalistic approach to much more participatory development, moving away from things being done to the city and being done with the city, giving communities a real stake over the assets that they have. And I mean, one of the best places in my constituency is a lovely old building called Fenton Town Hall. It was one of the original six town halls in the Federated City. It was then became the courthouse. A poor decision by then Labour Council to sell it off for private development caused real backlash in the community, real anger at the sense that their heritage and what they saw as the focal point of their community was being sold off for money. And when the community came together, they clubbed together, they found a benefactor, they bought it. They've now turned it into a thriving community asset, run with a community cafe that puts money back into the community, with a management group of volunteers and members who run community events. They run social events. There are charities that run out of it. It is hired out as a place of worship for 2 or 3 different denominations without any ruction, without any sort of conflict. It's where we hold our cooperative party meetings, and it is a focal point for a community that now has a real sense of identity. And it was done because the community said, we're going to come together and we're going to do this. And when people have tried to then turn community on one another in that part of my constituency, the community said, well, no, we're not going to fall for your division and your lies, because we know each other, because we spend time with each other, because we socialise with each other, because this weekend there were 20 volunteers hanging poppies around the church for Remembrance Day. There's the litter pick team that come together. It's this sense of community empowerment and ownership that meant that when people tried to divide them, they knew each other well enough to say, well, what you're saying about my neighbours, what you're saying about my friends and my communities isn't true. So they were insulated from it. And I think that is a model for me that we are going to try and replicate across Stoke-on-Trent, because we know we are susceptible to the violence and to the racism and to the fascism and to the division that comes with the far right. And we know that in the past we've been electorally successful in beating them, but we've not been successful in beating them in terms of their ideology. And we can do that. So I'm really glad that we're having this conversation with the Co-op Party. I'm glad we're having it this evening, because I think the next few months are going to be really rocky in terms of politics, with what we've seen happening in the US, with what we've seen with the election of a leader of a Conservative Party who is hell-bent on culture wars being a stem of her electoral strategy. So the more we can do to bring communities together and build that sense of ownership, that sense of empowerment, and that sense of cooperation among friends, I think is a way that we can make sure that when those tough times comes, we're all stood together, standing up for the values that we hold dear and that we know are actually the right values for our country. I'll leave it there, Caitlin.
Thanks so much, Gareth. Really helpful, really interesting. I can see we've got hands up and questions in the chat. We're going to hear from all of our speakers first, and then we'll go to Q&A. So keep your hand up or stick something in the chat. Either is fine. We're going to go now to Misbah Malik, who is, I think, your senior policy officer. Is that your job title? She's nodding. Yeah, at Hope Not Hate, and one of the authors of the Fear and Hope report, which came out very recently, and I would thoroughly recommend. Maybe one of us can put a little link to that in the chat. I'll let you talk about that. I've read it a few times, so I'm waxing lyrical about it, but I'll let you chat through that.
Fab. Thank you so much. I'm actually just going to share my screen just because I've got a couple of slides. Sorry, give me 1 second. Oh, okay, that does not seem to be working, but it's okay. I can talk through it anyway. And I'll maybe, Caitlin, I'll share you the slides afterwards and you can circulate round.
The tech is always an issue.
No, it's no problem. It's no problem. Yeah, there were just some pretty graphs and stuff, but it's no worries. Okay, yeah, so hi everyone. My name's Misbah. I'm Senior Policy Officer at Hope Not Hate. So we're the UK's leading anti-fascism organisation, and we deal with the far right, the communities vulnerable to them, and the issues and policies that give rise to them. And today I'm going to talk about how we build strong communities, how we build cohesive communities that are resilient to the far right. And the way we talk about strong communities and cohesive communities at Hope Not Hate is through the lens of community resilience, which is what the Fear and Hope report that Caitlin mentioned is about. The way we define community resilience at Hope Not Hate is the ability for a community to respond to, withstand, and recover from challenges or strain. Now, this can be kind of short-term trigger events like we saw after the riots, with the riots after the events in Southport. This can be more longer term strains, such as what we're seeing with the cost of living crisis. But essentially, we know that the far right exploit stress, they exploit fear, they exploit instability. And so communities that are best prepared to withstand the far right are the ones that are resilient. And there are three key ways, I guess, that we see resilience being built, and three key pillars. And crucially, community ownership and community power actually, we believe, addresses all three of these pillars, and so is a really good way to build strong, cohesive communities. So the first is access to resources. When people feel as though their needs are being met, when people feel as though they have access to services and kind of economic security more generally, they're much less likely to fall for scapegoating narratives or narratives about scarcity that the far right peddle, and that we've seen through the cost of living, for example, in particular, how they've been talking about asylum seekers and hotels for people seeking asylum. When people's own plate is full, they're less likely to look at the plate of other people. And we know that that can be crucial during times of economic strain in particular. The second pillar of community resilience is around agency and empowerment. And we saw this play out really heavily in the general election earlier this year, and Reform polling quite well, and being the third most popular party by vote share. This really signals this really strong anti-politics movement that we're seeing in the UK. And in particular, it relates to kind of people's perceptions of power more broadly. So it's not just democratic satisfaction, it's also how they see power, both local and nationally, working for them, where they see themselves within that network of power, whether they see that network of power serving them or not. And we know that disillusionment is one of the main ways that the far right are able to kind of recruit people. And so if people actually feel as though power and people in positions of power listen to them and that their needs are being met, this massively reduces the ability of the far right to kind of get within these communities. And the third pillar is related to social connectedness. And I think this is the one that people kind of most often think about when they think about community cohesion or kind of strong communities. And that's basically how people feel about each other. When people have a common identity to rally around, and as Gareth was just saying, when people actually know the people around them, they're much less likely to fall for the hateful narratives that the far right spread about vulnerable groups. We saw this play out in the riots in August. You know, what should have been a time for the national community to really come together and mourn together and really lean on each other. Instead, we saw divisive actors peddling really dangerous and harmful and hostile narratives about Muslims, about asylum seekers, about racialized communities more generally. If kind of people have strong social connections to each other, as Gareth really rightly said, they're not going to believe what the far right are saying about these groups, because they're going to be like, well, my neighbor, I know him really well and he's not like that. So these are kind of the three pillars of community resilience. And essentially at the moment, these pillars are incredibly low. If you read our Fear and Hope report, and I did have some graphs to share that kind of summarize it, but I'll speak through it. We basically find that community resilience is at a really low point, and that all three of these pillars are being massively eroded. And that's one of the reasons that we're seeing this kind of resurgence in not just the organized far right and how they kind of work and play within the wider political system, but also just the presence of far right narratives and rhetoric within the wider population, whether that's in media, but also kind of we've seen a lot of mainstream politicians echoing what used to be quite extreme far right terminology. We're now seeing that increasingly become part of mainstream spaces. And I think there are kind of two overarching reasons why community ownership and community power can really be crucial for kind of shifting the dial in these three pillars and shifting the way people feel about their local community, and therefore making our communities a lot more stronger. So I'll kind of start with these two overarching reasons, and then I'll go into kind of more specifics about how the hows and whys of kind of community ownership and power and how that relates to the three pillars of resilience. So the first kind of overarching reason is to do with national versus local. One of the main findings from our Fear and Hope report was that whilst people's perceptions of national community and kind of national picture and the future of the country nationally was quite poor, was quite pessimistic, they actually felt quite positively about their local community and their local connections. Yeah, 39% of people felt that people nationally in Britain were getting along well and that the future was looking hopeful, whereas 62% of people felt that their local community was peaceful and friendly. So there's a massive discrepancy between how people feel about national community versus local community. And so in the report, we identify kind of the local level as a really key area of intervention. If you can change how people feel about their local community, you can change how people feel more generally about the nation as a whole and where we're going. The other kind of main overarching reason why community power and community ownership is a really, really good way to defend against the far right, but also just increase resilience more generally, is because we found that participation in local life, whether that be charity and volunteer work, whether that be engaging with or visiting a local business or participating in local decision making, is at an all-time low. We started these Fear and Hope reports back in 2011, and we've done polling that's kind of similar for a lot longer. So we had a lot of data to troll back through. And what is really, really clear is this massive drop off in whether people are participating in their local community. And so we see that as another key way that people can really build up a sense of community. If we encourage and increase the ways in which people can participate locally, that's a really key way of kind of rebuilding up this kind of sense of local community that we've just talked about. So yeah, so to go back to kind of the three pillars of community resilience and specifically how community ownership and community power can help boost them and then help build up like really strong and cohesive communities. If we start with access to resources, because I'm guessing, that's kind of the most obvious one. Community ownership and community power more generally means that local assets are truly geared to towards what people want and what people need. I think a lot of the time when we're talking about access to resources, obviously there's this wider question of like the economic makeup of the country at the moment. It's obviously a very tough financial situation that we're in more broadly, but the processes of community ownership mean that people have control over where investment and reinvestment incurs, even at the most micro level. And so their needs are more likely to be met. And whether or not this happens in practice is another question. But at very least, there's a perception that people's needs are being met because they feel involved in the process with which resources are being acquired. And this obviously helps build really strong and cohesive communities because it means that scarcity narratives and kind of scapegoating is less powerful as people really truly feel catered for. And we see it as like a key way of building class-based solidarity, which we see as a really crucial way for kind of defending against the far right more generally. And then the second pillar of community resilience, which is around agency and empowerment. Community ownership, we feel, can really rebuild perceptions of an individual's role within wider systems and networks of power. Obviously, with kind of community power and ownership, people have agency within local decision making and therefore feel like they have some sort of control over what the future will look like. It's kind of what Gareth was saying about people feeling as though decisions are happening to them rather than with them, change is happening to them rather than with them. The processes of community ownership and community power will really help people feel listened to by mainstream processes. And so that massively reduces the need for the more extreme forms of representation that the far right present. So it really cuts through both this kind of pessimism angle, but also kind of anti-politics and sentiment more broadly. And then finally, kind of social connectedness. And again, like I said, this is kind of often the main one that people think about when they're talking about community cohesion. Community ownership and community power, we feel really helps build a sense of local pride, identity, and purpose. It basically means that everyone is in some way working together towards a common and a shared vision for the future. And the really key word here is common, whether that be common goal, common purpose, common identity. Essentially, community power gives people a reason to form connections with the people around them. It gives them a purpose for that. And as Gareth, rightly summarized at the beginning, when people actually have connection with people around them, they're much less likely to believe hateful and divisive narratives peddled by the far right. And I'm conscious I'm running out of time, so I'll just be really, really quick on kind of like the final overarching point, which is that strong, cohesive communities are ones with a shared vision for the future and also a means to get there. And the concept of community power does both of this. The kind of the social connectedness part gives the shared vision, but then also it opens avenues for power and resources, and that's what provides the means of getting there. So essentially, it addresses all three pillars of community resilience, and we know that for communities to truly be strong and resilient to the far right, all three of these kind of community resilience pillars need to be addressed. And I'll stop right there. Sorry, very, very rambling and not a lot of to look at other than my face.
No, that was great. Thank you so much, and thank you for being for adapting to the lack of slides.
That's okay.
That was excellent. Thank you so much. We'll get on to those three pillars in the Q&A. I think are really helpful sort of framework for thinking about community power and how it can contribute, as you say, to resilient communities. So we'll maybe come back to that. I might start us off with a question about that after once we get into Q&A. So last but certainly not least, I'm going to introduce Inayat Omarji, who I see has OBE, by the way. I have
MBE, sorry, MBE.
Oh, MBE.
Sorry.
Is that better than OBE? I think it is.
I have no idea, but
it's more. It's the new one. It's the new one. Who I see has been successful in screen sharing, so we'll see how we get on with that. But you're going to tell us a little bit about All Souls Bolton, and the journey to sort of transforming a community space and what it's getting up to now. So I will hand it over to you and keep my fingers crossed for your slides.
Thank you, Caitlin, and good evening, everybody. So yes, my name's Inayat Omarji, and I'm going to actually share with you three journeys, actually. A whistle-stop tour of All Souls Bolton, Bolton's past and present far right issues and how these were dealt with and not dealt with as such, and building strong communities through community champions, leaders, importance of community spaces, and I'd say four, but the last one is very important, which is, if you've not heard about it, you will hear about it tonight, which is the We're Right Here campaign, which I'm part of. One of the, they call us leaders, but 8 of us are campaigning with national providers to get a act in Parliament to do exactly what we're trying to achieve, is to give more power to communities and communities. So to start off with, and I've put a whistle-stop tour because there's a lot to do. And right at the end, I do have a video, and if that works, hopefully that'll galvanize and lift the spirits in terms of what we can achieve if we can get everybody together, politicians, communities, with the right messages. So without further delay, this is All Souls Bolton in its heydays. The old All Souls Bolton is a brick masterpiece by Paley and Austin. I'm not going to go into the history, dated 1881. The church closed its doors in 1987. Massive history. I'm not going to go into it because there's a lot to cover. This is a recent image of what it looks like. It's a beautiful historic church, and it's basically converted for use as a conference office, learning community space. And the church has been very carefully restored. The building works began in September 2013, and it was officially opened on 6th of December 2014. Through these next couple of slides, you'll see what happened, what transformation happened. If you see this masterpiece, and if you can imagine, close your eyes and think about this masterpiece, this humongous building sat in a predominantly Muslim community, terraced houses where these were built for the mill owners in the cotton industry, and this church was used by the workers and the philanthropy. The mill owners actually built this church. There's a bit of history there, and I live in this community, so I dedicated over 10 years of my time working with the Church's Conservation Trust and securing £4.9 million in grant funding through different modes when the local authorities and everybody else was shutting, community swimming pools and everything down. And I had to work really hard over 10 years to get the funding to get this place more or less refurbished and develop what we've developed now. So this was my journey in a short. It was, you know, scratching heads, going down, sleepless nights, loss of funding. Anybody going through a project will come through this journey. You know, there's happiness, there's fears, there's depression, there's sadness. You're running and then you're falling. This is the journey people will go through. The key question for me is, why should we have to allow, you know, people with vision, aspirations, and communities to go down some of the, you know, things that I've been through and a lot of people have been through and go through on a day-to-day basis in the communities when they want to deliver and do something. All Souls for All Souls. All Souls is the church name. We retained the name All Souls, but because the building, the activities and everything we were providing, All Souls Bolton was born out of the need for a space that brought communities and people together and raised aspirations. Within the local community, there was no community space where people come together, no youth clubs, no community assets. You know, if there were assets, they weren't managed properly. Local authorities couldn't manage properly. They were shutting things down. And this was an asset that basically needs some inspiration and love and coming together to develop something. So what did this place that inspires look like inside? This is what it looked like. We had loads of pews, but it was shut. It was shut for, you know, over a number of decades. You can see Lloyd Grossman here, who was the chair of the church's conservation trust at one time when I introduced the concept in my community where this church sat, and contacted the church's conservation and said, can we do something with it? If you don't do anything with this building, this beautiful building, you know, it's not going to survive. You know, it'll get vandalized, it'll get burnt down. There's nobody else, there's no assets that people can come together. So what does this place that inspires look like now, and what does it offer? So this is the outside. There's a big sign at the front saying all these things are on offer. Sneak preview through the door there. This is lighted at night. This is actually what it looks like. This is not a CGI image. This was when it actually got completed. This is exactly as it is when it got completed. And this are some of the images and what's on offer. There's a community hub, there's a business hub, there's social groups happening, office spaces, events and venue hire, cafe space, all sorts of things happening. There's a football club that goes in there and does training. Martial arts happen. And this is some of the programs that happen. And this is some of the weekly activities that are happening, and more. This was just a snapshot of some of the activities taken. So moving towards how does this link into assets and community power and buildings? So I just want to touch upon the second part, and it'll all come together eventually. Bolton's past and present far-right issues. Let me go back 23 years ago. Summer of race riots feared after clashes in 2001. This was the headline in the papers. Ministers talking about hotspots, and Bolton was named one. We were quite fortunate where the Oldham riots happened 23 years ago, that it was thought about that, you know, it will spill into Bolton, Preston, Rochdale, other places. And we were very resilient at that time, coming together as leaders and communities to ensure that, you know, the riots happened in 2001, 23 years ago, didn't really escalate and pull over. You know, there's certain things happened within, you know, 23 years ago, but we were quite resilient at that time, and we'll pull together. Going back 10 years ago now from today, 10 years ago, a number of mosques started to develop into new builds, and we had BNP, EDL coming out and saying no more mosques, sparked surges of protests across Bolton. In my neighborhood, we had a very busy arterial route literally shut down for half of the day because there were the far right protesting on that road, and the counter protesters came and it shut itself down. Now, I was very heavily involved 10 years ago with this, and we worked very hard with the local authority, statutory services, the police, local authority, and community champions, leaders, to minimize any issues in and around the communities. It started off with protests in the town centre. I can remember us, and this was between 2014 and 17, and I can remember that we set up meetings with community champions, leaders from all backgrounds, and we actually put a ring of steel around the town centre and neighbourhoods with community champions and leaders who knew and who had the finger on the pulse of the communities. They knew exactly where these young people or young adults would come from, and the messages were going out. So 10 years ago, there was a very good network of champions and community leaders and assets. But unfortunately, over the last 10 years, in my opinion, things have dwindled in terms of losing assets, communities and youth clubs, disappearing, leadership, which we had 10 years ago. People have moved on. We've not developed new leaders in communities. Resources have diminished. And this is one of the things, 3 months ago, Bolton weren't unscathed. We had, disorder in the town centre, but unfortunately, it wasn't managed as it was 10 years ago in terms of building the resilient, building the community champions and bringing them together. And there was a number of reasons for that. Local leaders and community champions not engaged this time. And this was because, there's been a massive change in leadership within statutory services, staff moving on, cuts in community development services, when staff move on in leadership positions in statutory services, whether it's the police, the local authority, on other providers, their priorities have moved on to other things, with budgets and, tackling other things. So they've not really focused on galvanizing and looking at new champions and leaders in communities and how to get them together. The decline of community facilities, youth clubs, and the lack of investment in general community development has meant the statutory services were lost. They didn't know who to contact. And just an example of this was that I got a call on the day of the protest in the town centre by our local councillor saying, Inayat, can you help? We've got young lads from all around Bolton, just coming through different guinnels, coming into the town centre. We need the community out here. But it was too late. The engagement was not there, and we were shouting about it. And I firmly believe it's just that we lost all that because of the funding cuts, the community facilities, and so forth. Within the Old Souls area, we managed it very robustly, but Old Souls is only part of one neighbourhood, and other neighbourhoods suffered 3 months ago where things spilt back into their communities. Unfortunately, things happened where young people got arrested, they've got criminal records and so forth. So there's a knock-on effect on, the lack of facilities and the resources and the investment coming into communities that were not allowed to build the leadership and the community leadership that was there in the past. So just moving on to the third part, we're right here. If people don't know what we're right here is, we're calling for a major piece of legislation which would fundamentally change where power lies in this country. So I'm part of the We're Right Here campaign with 8 other community champions and community leaders and a whole host of other champions and networks across the country. What we're trying to achieve is to get an act in Parliament to establish 3 new community rights. we've heard, I think the policy within the Co-op and the Labour Party is around striving towards community right to buy. That's the key thing, giving communities the right of first refusal once buildings and spaces with significant community value come up for sale. We see so many buildings now within local authorities that literally would serve and do a tremendous job within, communities, but unfortunately they just sold off. They sold off because, what the argument from the local authority is that we need that money for the public purse. But what they don't realize is if you retain these assets for community use, for first rights for communities and community groups to take ownership, you'll actually save money moving forward in terms of the activities, the opportunities that these community groups and charities that would provide from these buildings. A community right to shape public services, encouraging greater collaboration between community and public institutions when designing, commissioning, delivering local services. A community right to control investment, increasing community control over the key spending decisions which affect local neighbourhoods. We want to see that the public purse, the community, the local authority purse, communities are involved in shaping how those public services and the investment is controlled and spent within communities. The second part is the introducing community covenants. It's literally, you can call community covenants as alliances or forums, but these neighbourhood level arrangements would bring local people, community organisations and local authorities together to share power in making decisions. And the third part is that what we're pushing for is establishing a community power commissioner. This would be an independent office that would be charged with ensuring action is taken across government to uphold new community rights, enable the formation of community covenants everywhere, and generally unlock community power. We feel that this is a crucial part to have a community power commissioner to ensure that it's not a one-hit wonder when we talk about community power. It's somebody's actually keeping an eye on, does this happen in reality on the ground, in communities, in local authorities, up and down the country? This is what we're all about. And just for a final bit, I've got a 2-minute video, Caitlin, if that's okay, which just galvanizes everything. And hopefully that'll just finish off, and then hopefully we can go on to question and answers. So I'm going to just press play and hopefully this works.
We've been doing this forever.
Making our places better.
Creating good jobs.
Building community.
And you know what? We've always been here.
We've always been here.
We've always been here.
Here with the people we love. Here for the places we call home. Far away behind closed doors, people in power are looking for solutions.
To inequality. Local decline. To loneliness and mistrust.
Searching for answers in the wrong places. Well, we're the answer. We know what our places need the most. Connection.
Opportunities. Places to meet.
And we're making it happen.
There are people like us in every neighbourhood.
In this country, power and wealth may not be evenly spread.
But talent and passion are everywhere. What if the system worked with us and not against us?
What if we took charge of our neighbourhoods?
What if we took back control for real?
This is the moment for community power.
For answers?
Thank you so much.
Thank
We
you.
should, I've seen that video before and it's lovely. We should say
Nice.
that's the We're Right Here campaign, which Inayat is part of, and the Co-op Party's worked with as well. We actually don't have loads of time for questions because I don't want to run this longer than 7. So what I'm going to do is I'll take a couple of questions from the chat first, and then I'll go to the people that have raised their hands, if that's all right. So we'll start. I've got 2 here. We've lost Gareth to the votes, and soon the alarm's going to go off. So we'll try and get through that before that alarm goes off. So we'll between the 3 of us sort of do some of this. A couple of questions that have come to me on the chat. One of them is for you, Inayat, which is about the ownership and management model for All Souls and how that works, which is a question from David, a bit of a techie question, but very interesting, I'm sure. So we'll come to you for that. And then more broadly, I've got a question about sort of how we create a next generation. I think that means of individuals that are and communities, I suppose, that are resilient to the far right. And I think that's quite a prescient question given what's happened over the pond today as well. Sort of how do we guard against losing a next generation to sort of to hateful ideology and things like that. And then we also have a question on the sort of, and I think this is probably for you, Misbah, about the on your pillar of social connectedness, which is, I said we'd come back to the pillars, which is about the sort of how do we do that? How do we kind of create spaces for people to sort of come together and build social connectedness? And I think probably Inayat and I would say that community power is probably quite a good answer to that, but it's probably not the only one. So I'll open, if I come, we'll go to Misbah first, if that's all right, and then we'll come and we'll reverse back, and then we'll go to the people with their hands up. I know, Ivan, I can see you sent your question in the chat as well, so I'll read that out, but we'll do that in the next round. Lovely, thank you.
Yeah, fab. Yeah, so I guess the question about the next generation is definitely a pertinent one. We did some research earlier this year on hateful attitudes in young people, and the results were quite depressing. I know there's this kind of perception that young people more generally are, woke, that like Gen Z is the generation of wokeness. That is true in some respects, but actually, when you look at particularly the attitudes of young men and young men of color as well, specifically, they are very, very divergent from what young women think. And so that is obviously worrying, because if you've got 50% of the population who don't necessarily believe in kind of a vision, that's worrying. But I think education is key for that, in terms of like particularly targeting young people. But I think to address this kind of next generation thing more broadly, I think what's crucial is what we were talking about before, and this like shared vision for the future, and this shared vision that everyone feels they have a say in, everyone feels like they've contributed to. Something we're working on and Hope Not Hate is building this new narrative of a multicultural Britain and what that looks like. And it needs to be something that, kind of to borrow Gareth's vocabulary, it's something that people feel as though it's happening with them rather than to them. So it's something that everyone is invested into. And I know that's much easier said than done, but that's kind of the broader goal. And then the second question on like, how do we actually do social connectedness? That is the $1 million question, right? It's easier said than done. And I think, yeah, community power is a really key aspect to that. I think kind of social contact theory, and this idea that the more the time that people spend with each other, the more kind of connection is fostered there. That's definitely true to some extent, but I think also, and we go into this in Fear and Hope, so definitely read it, social connectedness isn't the only thing, especially if you don't address underlying hateful attitudes. And so I think there's a wider piece of work that needs to be done, which is about addressing hateful and hostile attitudes and rhetoric that are just so normalized in everyday society, right? Like, it's not just a case of putting people in a room around like with tea and cake and getting them to chat to each other. There has to be this whole society-wide re-education program that actually addresses the hateful attitudes that drive people to not feel socially connected towards each other, or not want to feel socially connected towards each other. So that's the TLDR, but go to the Fear and Hope report for more insight into that.
Good plug. We love to see it. We'll come to you, Inayat, for the other question on
Ownership and management.
Ownership and management, and any reflections on the other ones as well, and then we'll do a quick kind of final round.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, thank you. Just before I start on ownership management, I had to rush that because there was 3 pieces in terms of All Souls, you know, and all that, and then We're Right Here. If anybody wants to know more about We're Right Here and sign up and join the campaign and support us with our comment, just go on to right-here.org and you can find all the information, our ask and a manifesto and everything. Moving on to ownership and management. Very good question. It's not an easy one. It's not a straightforward road. It's not literally, we started 10 years before 2014 was the start of, was the idea. We opened the doors in 2014 with a community group set up, a charity. Unfortunately, it didn't work out with that charity setup. I had to step away to do other things. And, you know, over the time, there was issues there. And just being very honest here to say, it didn't work out. I then came back and had to re-energize in terms of the activities, the opportunities, the management, the ownership. And what we did was the Churches Conservation Trust took it back in-house to manage the facility as a national charity, put some workers in place. So they had a centre manager and a development officer. That went on for a good number of years. And just to say that over that period, we housed a number of other charities in that building. And just to say that now in 2024, we've actually just now, probably a month ago, given the ownership and the building to a charity to run that building in terms of the activities, the programs and everything, looking at their business plans, looking at their models, looking at their finances, looking at their journey, looking at their experience. And I can say that I'm quite confident now that this charity, it's called Cohesion, delivers a whole host of programs, and they're a very good setup in terms of delivering the outcomes and the objectives that we set out to refurbish this building back into community use. Just to also say that I sit on the Churches Conservation Trust as a trustee, and we have 300 plus churches, you know, that are closed, that we're not trying to open all of them up, but we're trying to do innovative things to these churches where we can open up churches which are sat there. We will do, if there is a backing from the community and the community is there with a good solid business plan, with a good solid partnership approach. So in terms of ownership and management, it's not a straightforward journey. You'll go up, you'll go down, you'll find, and maybe, you know, charities have suffered. And that's what happened when we start opening. We had a good level of funding went down, things happened within communities, people stopped, and now we had to re-galvanize the communities to start using it and do other things. But, you know, it's on a good trajectory in terms of financial, communities, programs, people coming together as well. But like I said, it's not a very straightforward journey in terms of ownership and management. But the ultimate ownership of the building in terms of bricks and mortar is the Churches Conservation Trust as a charity. But the day-to-day running and everything and the programming is now done by a charity called Cohesion.
Great, thank you. It's very a lot of sort of these community assets have very complicated ownership structures, and one thing that the community right to buy and the infrastructure that will sit around it tries to do is to simplify some of that and make it a little bit easier. I don't want to run over too much, so we're going to whip through. I'm going to read Ivan's message. Thank you for sending it to me, Ivan. This is about autism support services. Ivan says there's a terrible lack of adult autism support services. The last Labour government brought in the Autism Act in 2009, which introduced the obligation to provide autism services, but in 14 years the Tories did nothing. And the question is sort of is whether services like autism support could be something that community ownership can address. I think maybe more broadly it's a question about whether the We're Right Here campaign and the right to shape services, whether there's an aspect there. So we'll do that one. And then Karen, you've messaged me directly Excuse me. Do you want to say something quickly? We'll have to keep it short, if that's all right. But I can ask you to unmute now to ask a question if you like. Karen, do you want to speak? I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Hello.
Hi. Hello.
Oh, I didn't realise I'd come up as Karen Drat. No, that's
Not your name.
I'm Patricia Hay Justice, actually.
Oh.
So I've actually put it in the chat very quickly. I suppose I won't go into all the detail here, but I'll just say, I think for me, I'd like to understand this issue of governance. I have real concerns that where all things are going in terms of, for me, I'm a Labour Party councillor. I see at this moment in time that a lot of the assets, whatever is happening with local authorities, they are being sold off, or let's say, they're being sold off, and we're being forced to sell them because we're being starved of money. That's where it starts. And my concern now is that we then go from that, because local authorities were set up to ensure we had really good governance of everything that takes place. And we're going, I just think to myself, I see right across where I am, we've got communities that are well organised and well resourced. And so I call it the wealthy and organised communities. And then we've got a whole load of other communities that have got serious deprivation areas. A lot of those people don't have the organised ability. And my concern is, we're going from this model where we used to have local authorities, and I'm not saying against it. I just think there's a lot of things for me that I need to be looking at and ironing out with individuals and saying what's happening here. And this is why I think it's probably better to actually have maybe a discussion or something like that, because governance is a massive issue to me. Ownership, I think in this regard, we can see what's happened with that church. But I'm really concerned because I'm very much into all these assets belong to the people anyway. And local authorities, I thought part of the job of a local authority was set up to ensure that there was obviously fairness to access for everybody. I'm just thinking of libraries and that sort of thing. A community sets them up, which is great, and gets lots of and we all set up and we get our grants and so, but at the end of the day, I don't know how well that's sustainable as well. Whereas I just think to myself, we're going from sort of things that used to be privately owned to community owned, going back to selectively owned. So I'm, and it's not a criticism. I'm just wanting to understand, and explore that even more where we're looking with that. So I'd really love to actually be able to be in contact with somebody that I can actually look at that in terms of the policy side of it.
Thank you, Patricia, and sorry for getting your name wrong. I've sent you my email because it's an interesting point. It's one that I've heard before. I think there's some misconceptions about not from you, from a wider perspective about sort of what that there's only sort of one type of person that's involved in community ownership, and that it's only sort of a privileged group. I don't think that's quite right, and I think there's a lot of examples where there's a whole breadth of people involved. And I said that I would link you up with We're Right Here as well, who will also be able to help with that, I think. But yeah. Drop me an email, and we can pick it up further.
Can I just come in and just say that if you go to the We're Right Here campaign website, you'll see some of the stories. So we've got one of our campaign ladies who manages a farm. It's a community farm. Now there's loads and loads of stories where I think you're right. There's some anxieties if you don't get it right. And what we're not saying, we're not campaigning for, is that anybody just knocking on the door of the local authority saying there's an asset, give it to us, we'll run it. Obviously, there's going to be due diligence. There's going to be all sorts of business planning and all that. What the key concerns are is that basically, there's a lot of hurdles to jump around. There's a lot of delays. Communities get frustrated, and there's not a clear-cut process that basically things are followed. So I'm not going to dwell on that. There's loads and loads of stories and stories we really like. You can contact us as well, and we can sit down and share you loads of examples of where it has been successful. And yes, there will be community assets and communities where they won't be successful, but they'll learn from that. Once you've lost an asset in a community to a private developer or funder, you've lost it forever. So I think that's the key thing as well, that we've got to give communities a chance to stand up for themselves and deliver something. And sometimes they won't get it right, but they'll learn next time, and everybody will learn, whether it's the local authority and everybody. So I'm just going to stop at that, but there's loads of examples we can give.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really helpful. And we should say as well, one of the things that we're campaigning for at the Co-op Party is for a sort of system of development support that sits around community ownership. Because one thing that's certainly true is that at the moment, and Inayat and others who've been involved with this can tell you more than I can, but there is, as you say, such a process of hurdles to jump through. And one thing we want is to make it easier so that everyone can access that, rather than people with the time to do it. So that's a big part of our campaigning work as well. Can I get a nod from our speakers as to whether you're happy to take one? We're only going to have time for one more question, I'm afraid. I don't want to run this over too much. So I'm really sorry, but I think Thomas was first. So I'm going to go to Thomas for a very short question, please. And then we'll have an answer, and then I think we'll have to call it a day. But so lovely that there's so much enthusiasm for the topic.
Hi everyone. So I will say I really like a lot of these initiatives, and they remind me very much sort of the kibbutz movement that my family actually grew up in. But my question, I guess, is a lot of the time these movements do tend to attract what I like to call the anarchist sentiment, people that aren't interested in that view communalism as a chance to strike back at the government and be more destructive. And oftentimes those people I find can be very exclusive because they have a very sort of narrow view of what is the right kind of people. So how do you ensure that your good and your very positive and inclusive cooperative elements don't end up attracting such anarchist people that mainly want to settle a grudge and want to use the idea of communalism to either cause revolution or exclude certain people that they don't view as having the right kind of views? And what do you do when those people turn up, as I imagine inevitably they do?
Thanks. Who wants to take that? I will say, not in my experience. I think I'm sure that is an element of sort of transferring power, but I think there's lots of the vast majority of examples that I've come across of community ownership are people who just want the assets to be run in their interests and in the interest of the community. So, but I'll open it up to the floor and maybe for both of you, like I think we can take it broader as well. Like, how do we involve a wide breadth of people from a community into the sort of building of cohesive and resilient communities? We don't have to look just at ownership, I don't think.
Yeah. So I think just very briefly, in every community there'll be a seed, and that seed will grow and be planted, and that seed will be planted, and there'll be others that surround that seed and that person. It's a journey. It's a journey, and when you live in the neighborhoods, when you live in communities, they know how. I always say they know they have the finger on the pulse. So in my opinion, I've not seen where people are destructive of destructing their own communities. They want to get involved and push an agenda, or push the right to buy a community asset, or delivery of an activity, or shape a service for the benefit of the wider community. So for me, if anybody came into my neighborhood or my community automatically, I would say, if they came in and said certain things, you'd know that they're destructive. And the people living in the communities and the neighborhoods who want to deliver change will automatically go against that grain of individuals. But like I said, I don't feel that the people or individuals, it starts from individuals, then it grows into a flower, and then the rest of the community abides by how you do it. They're not there to destruct or destroy or do a detriment to their communities. They're there to more or less mold, to advocate, to shape, to push the boundaries with politicians or with the local authorities or nationally or regionally, to make a difference. And that's my opinion in terms of the work I've done for many decades in my communities.
Thank you so much. Misbah, do you want to do some final reflections for us before we wrap up?
Yeah, I was gonna kind of, I guess, broaden it out a bit more, and kind of slightly related to the question that was just asked about, like, when it comes to any sort of community organizing or community, whether that's, you know, in the political sense or whether that's kind of community assets or just kind of general community resilience building, I think something that we really do have to have in mind is like who actually is involved in that. When you look at, for example, like volunteering statistics, there are certain ethnicities, certain ages that are definitely overrepresented and others that aren't. When you look at local decision making, it's often kind of the people with more spare time, and that obviously has a class link to it. So I think, like, what's important is that before we get to the point where it's kind of a formalized process of, for example, community ownership or community power, before it's those formalized processes, the way to make sure that those are actually reflective of who is in the community, it has to start at the more micro level. It has to be who is volunteering at the food banks. It has to be who is visiting the local bake sale, who are the like trustees at the school, who are taking the kids on the school trips, like all of that very like low level, low commitment stuff. We've got to make sure that that is truly representative before we go to the more kind of formalized processes of community ownership and community power and stuff like that. So yeah, that is something that I think we just need to keep in mind as well.
Definitely. Thank you so much. And we should say as well, so at the Co-op Party, we work with both We're Right Here and Hope Not Hate, as well as a whole gang of other amazing organisations that are sort of working in this space. So anyone that is interested in that work, is interested in finding out more about what we're doing, please do get in touch with us. We can update how members can get involved, and all of that sort of thing. So thank you so much to our speakers, the two that are still with us, and also to Gareth, who has rushed off to vote. Thank you so much for your time of an evening. I know it's precious, so really, really appreciate it. We have another Co-op live this time next week, I think. Which is on our campaign around access to culture and ticket touts, which some of you will have seen, and that will be a really interesting session. We'll have another one of our new MPs, a journalist that works in this space, and some of the experts on sort of making sure fans can access live music. So that's going to be a really, really interesting session. So please do come along to that on the 13th, I think it is. And yeah, thank you so much to our speakers, and thank you to you all for coming, and hopefully we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.